Hello, everybody. Spencer here, Wednesday Night Warrior. So this week, what do I care about? First of all, shout out to Wes Singleton. He's one of the teammates on the CCMTG testing team. He won a PPTQ this weekend. Shout out to there are like three other people that top eighted. Man, we have a lot of top eights, and our conversion rate right now it's not great. And it's kind of like a big side joke among the friends. But thank you everybody for watching. This week we're going to talk about control and where it sits in standard right now and why it sits the way that it sits. Don't forget that you can join the Patreon page at patreon.com/ccmtg, and you can get rewards that'll come out if you listen to the podcast. Check out Constructive Criticism. It's our weekly podcast about getting better at Magic. And don't forget to check out the testing videos here on this YouTube channel. But let's get started and kind of talk about the main things that I want to discuss when it comes to control. So for those who don't know, I love mid-range decks. I have been playing mid-range since the beginning of my time in Magic, starting with Blood Red Elf Jund in Standard, Volakut decks. Those are like ramp decks, but they were mid-range decks. Birthing Pod with, Rug Pod, Bant Pod, all the pod decks. Jund Standard with Master of the Fells and Thragtusk. I won states with. I just have been playing midrange for a long time, and the reason that I like it is I feel like I personally am very good at playing against control decks with it. I really like those kind of matchups, and I do really well in them. The other reason that I like them is I like being the control deck against aggro. This is the definition of a midrange deck. Now you might be asking yourself, why is Spencer talking about midrange when this video is going to be about control decks? Well, we had a Facebook thread where somebody said something about control in standard, and with all the midrange decks, why isn't it good? And it got me thinking, like, what do I do with my midrange decks? Right now I play a ton of Temur Black and things like that make me good against control. And how are the decks that are currently the mid-range decks in Standard doing that? So I pulled up a lot of different deck lists, and I have a lot of a lot of decks in front of me. Like, just for example, I have Joshua Layton's deck list from the Pro Tour, just with Esper Dragons. I have Blue Black Control from Pro Tour Origins as well. It's actually Blue Black Dragons by Shouta, but I have that deck list up. I have Blue White Control back in 2013 from Huey Jensen. I have Esper Control Andrew Davis top eighting in Baltimore at an SCG Open. I have Levi Gaines top eighting an SCG Open in 2014 in January 4th with Blue White Control. I have a lot of these deck lists up, and I kind of want to talk about what separates them and other control decks in the past from control right now, and why Esper and Grixis is, we'll actually talk about that, but why Esper Control and Esper Dragons aren't as good as you might think they should be. So the first thing that any mid-range player will tell you is what you want against control is you want cheap threats, you want to diversify your threats, and you want inherent card advantage. So by cheap threats, this right now, like if you think about it, we have tons of cheap threats. We have Warden of the First Tree. We have Sylvan Advocate with Enifenza. We have Mantis Rider. We have Deathmist Raptor. We have, so many just these very efficient creatures that, like, first of all, some of them create card advantage. Some of them are like insane in the late game, like Fleece Mainline is a great example of this. I talk about this all the time. So Fleece Mainline is a Watch Wolf. I already want that card against control. And then like late game, it's like this have to deal with threat that you just like activate, and they're like, well, I guess I'm like gonna die to this thing if I don't have what like what could they have? It's like it's so many. There's so many like cards like that are the kind of cards you want against control. Cheap things like, and then diversifying. So you want like different enchantments. If you can get an enchantment in your deck that has like relevant game against multiple decks, that's perfect. But planeswalkers are great for that. Creatures of different power and toughness, different sizes and different speeds. So, for example, like haste creatures, very good against control. And they're also good if they're big haste creatures against control too, because that means that like post wrath they can come down and attack. and that's a pretty big deal. So like things like even Savage Knuckleblade is in the deck that I like to play. I know the Savage Knuckleblade isn't something that's seen a ton of play, but it's like the one that sits home for me in my Team Black deck is like just this all around great thing. It's like it comes in early, it blocks against aggro, and then it like is hasted against control, or you can just play it on turn 3 against control. And if you untap with it, it's very hard for them to deal with. And I think that that things like Warden of the Herstory are a very good example of why would Abzan aggro have a good matchup against control. It probably doesn't have a great matchup against control, but it's not a bad matchup, and that's kind of what the problem is for control. Is when you look back at control decks, like some of the things that I'm gonna go into what control needs to beat mid range, now, and that's powerful draw engines. So things like Sphinx's Revelation, Jace Architect of Thought, Jace the Mind Sculptor, hard to deal with threats that just take over the game. Etherling, Elspeth. I actually put down like things like Blood Baron of Viscopa and Obsidat, where like things that sometimes Esper Control would adopt a few years ago. Even control decks would like play Thragtusk, Bant Control. I did SCG Open that we played in Vegas was like the best deck. It was a Reed Duke deck that a lot of people played, and it was just Farseek and Thragtusk were the only green cards. But Thragtusk was like this very efficient, kind of hard to deal with threat that like really did. Thragtusk took over the game in such a very simple way, and so it's kind of things like that they really need. Like Elspeth, I think Chandra in this standard fits this bill. It's like this threat wiper card advantage engine. It's insane. Like that card could be the future of control in standard. We just haven't figured it out yet, I think. But these are the kind of cards that control needs to beat mid range. And then the other thing is they need efficient and effective removal. Even a year ago, Esper Dragons, if you look at I'm just going to pull up Joshua Layton's list. Things that he has that we don't have, and we don't even have like good substitutes for, are BioBlight, Hero's Downfall, Thoughtseize. Like these are cheap answers that can take. Like Thoughtseize is a great example. Like he can play Thoughtseize as something to stop something like a cheap threat from coming down. He can play early. It's like I'd rather take 2 from a Thoughtseize than 4 from a Savage Knuckleblader, or 4 from an Anafenza, or 6 from a Warden of the Herstory. Or he can take the hard to deal with threats that he doesn't have an answer to, like Gideon would be now, or back then it would have been something like Sorin, or other planeswalkers that create tokens, create value throughout the game, and that's just something control decks don't really have now. They're kind of stuck playing Duress, which is like, well, I have this Duress, but now I'm looking down at like 3 Deathmist Raptors, and it's just not that great. Whereas before, like if you were staring down 3 Deathmist Raptors, you could BioBlight them, or in other decks that we have in front of me, it's like things like Detention Sphere, these all answer threats, and even something as simple as Hero's Downfall. You think to yourself, well, like control decks would, like some blue black control decks would play for Hero's Downfall, and we don't have that. We have Ruinous Path, and it's not the same thing. Specifically because of things like Haste Creatures, or things that are mana sinks like Warden of the Herstory, or even Fleecemane Lion. If that card was in standard, like, can you imagine a world without Hero's Downfall? It's kind of a scary world, and it's kind of like when I think back to things like when I had Terminate, it's like, what? I had Terminate, I could play with that card, and that is so different than what I have now. Even when I look at this Esper control deck from 2014. I'm just gonna read off this deck list because it's so different and so much more powerful than things that we have now that we could play as an Esper control deck. 3 Thoughtseize, so 2 Doomblade, 4 Jace Architect of Thought. That's already like better than every Planeswalker that we have, because for control specifically, because Jace Architect of Thought is good. Jace Viren's Prodigy is good. I don't think it fills the role that these style of cards, even Jace Beleren, served in these decks, where it's this powerful draw engine that's kind of hard to deal with. Whereas Jace Architect of Thought turns on their impulses against you, their fire impulses. They had 4 Detention Spheres, 4 Sphinx's Revelation, 4 Supreme Verdict. We'll get to that in a minute. 3 Devour Flesh. This answers Hexproof guys. 3 Elspeth Suns Champion, 2 Dissolve, 2 Heroes Downfall. This deck was so good that it could play 2 Heroes Downfall when later decks had to play 4 in like blue-black control. Um, and then it had 2 Blood Baron of Viscopa as another hard to deal with threat. A lot of these decks played Etherling for a long time, the blue-white versions. I know that the mono Elixir of Immortality deck won a GP in the hands of Huey Jensen, where like the only win condition was Elixir of Immortality. Huey Jensen also took second, I believe, at a GP with this deck list, and this is another one that we can talk about and the value of some of these cards. We have 4 Azorius Charm, 4 Dissolve, 4 Divination, 2 Quicken, 4 Sphinx's Revelation, 4 Supreme Verdict, 2 Syncopate, 4 Detention Sphere, 1 Elixir, 1 Elspeth, 3 Jace Architect of Thought, 26 lands. So first of all, like this deck is a madman's dream because it's just this grindy deck that gets value by by Azorius charming your guys. People don't realize Azorius Charm was removal. They think that it puts it on top of the deck, but it actually takes the creature off the battlefield. It 1-for-1s it. It does get it away. So if you don't care, they can choose to play that, or they can play something on curve. And so oftentimes they wouldn't even play that creature, and it's like you killed it. And sometimes you would blank their draw steps because you're like, I don't even care if you have this later. I only care about it right now, and that's a huge deal. That's something that it's a pretty big deal. That like now when I think about like the cheap interactive spells, like Dromoka's Command doesn't fit in a control deck. You don't play creatures, you can't kill things with it. Ultimate Price is terrible right now. That doesn't mean it can't be good later. Maybe they'll give us Ultimate Price where in a world where it's good, but right now it's not. And we don't have those things, and that's what's causing Control to have a problem. Because the other thing that these decks are doing is they're playing things like Goblin Dark Dwellers, Den Protector, Deathmist Raptor, different Planeswalkers that give them value, and then cheap things like Warden of the First Tree and Offensive that really make it hard for you to win games of Magic because they come down with these 3/3s really early or these 4/4s really early, and then what are you stuck doing? What are you doing to affect the game? And you don't have things like Supreme Verdict is like this answer to everything that's going on. You have things like Planar Outburst or End Hostilities that just don't do the same thing. Like Day of Judgment, Wrath of God effects, they did a lot to keep things in balance and to keep Wizards is under the impression that these cards are too good. And maybe one day we'll feel the same way. Maybe one day I'll feel like I don't deserve an Elvish Mystic in my deck. I'll feel like Leaf Gilder is enough. But right now, as somebody who's been playing for a long time, it's why would I play bad Esper Control when I can play pretty good 4-color good stuff? And still be the control deck in the matchups that I want to be the control deck in. Because I can play the control deck and be the control deck 100% of the time, or I can play a mid-range deck and choose when I'm going to be the control deck, and I think that's where a lot of players have aligned. Because Esper Dragon still sees play, it's still a deck. I know people have tried Grixis Control, and I think that might be the future of Control and Standard, but maybe it's still not there yet. It's hard. It's hard to look at the things that we used to have and compare them to things we knew, and that's what's so great about Magic is that things are always different. But I think that the reason that Control is dead, I think it's dead. I think that it's safe to say that it's dead is we don't have these nets we can throw out. Because, I mean, Doomblade was this net that, like, just caught these problem creatures, or even, like, Path to Exile back in the day with the Elspeth Blue-White control deck, or a Detention Sphere, or all of these things that had these instant speed, kind of answer the problem things, take a little bit of damage, clean up the mess with a Wrath effect. We don't have that. And that, not to say that we can't have that. When Siege Arrow rotates, maybe there's a Languish, Chandra, this Great Linguist Chandra Grasp of Darkness deck, this red-black control deck. That's great with maybe it's splashing blue for something for some kind of card draw, or maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe Painful Truths is enough, and you can splash whatever color you want from there. And maybe there's a control deck that's non-blue. I don't know. Um, the other thing to think about is like how good does a counterspell need to see play. Right now we have Dissipate, and I think that's good enough to see play. That card's seen play before. Um, but the problem is how much stuff is getting under it. The cheap, efficient creatures that we're talking about, Warden, Sylvan Advocate, and Offenza, Mantis Rider is something that I haven't even really brought up yet. These cards get under it when they're on the play, and then you're just staring at this card in your hand, and you don't even have Essence Scatter as backup right now. That card's not even in Standard. So you have to warp your mana in your 3-color Dragon's deck to play something along the lines of sorry, spacing it. Silumgar's Scorn, and you don't have things to clean up like BioBlight. So I think that there's going to be a world where both. First of all, there's going to be a world where control works, and it will. I mean, there's always going to be a world where control works. Control has, Patrick Chapin has top 8 of the GP in this year of Standard with Esper Control, and the thing is like kind of like the threat right now that you kind of get to play is Ugin, and the problem is that Ugin doesn't do a good enough job in this Standard format of being a hard to deal with threat that cleans up the board. Because 8 mana is really hard to get to in your control deck when they're attacking you with such efficient creatures, and they don't have to use as many resources to do it because things like Den Protector and whatever else they're doing are giving them value. Kolaghan's Command, Monastery Mentor is like a card I haven't even mentioned yet. That card's like the super efficient card that's really good against control, and you don't have to commit more to the board. You just get to cast other spells. And you create this virtual card advantage because of things like that. So I think that the idea that you can't beat a control deck with a mid-range deck is oversold. And people think that control, like they don't understand why control is dead in this format. And the truth is that there are tools that you are given to decide if you want to beat control with mid-range. And this format, you get to use all of those tools because your mana is these 5 color, any colors you want mana decks. And so I can play Siege Rhino in my Jund deck without even caring. And so I get to play all of the most efficient cards in 4 different colors. And that's a lot for control to handle because when you diversify like that, when you have things that produce card advantage or are really cheap and things like that, they don't have catch-all things that they used to have. They don't have Detention Sphere. They don't have Supreme Verdict. They don't have Day of Judgment. And they don't even have things like Titans to take over the game. Threats that we used to play, like Pearl Lake Ancient, they can't see play now. Ugin, they can't really do it because you play this Ugin and then they play a Mantis Rider, and after you've minus 4'd, your thing is dead, and they're left with 3 cards in hand and a Mantis Rider in play, and it's just a really hard thing to deal with. Or they played a Monastery Mentor, you had to come down in -3, and they didn't lose anything because the only thing that they've really dedicated to this board is that one card. And that, I think that's a problem. I think that's something that Wizards should address. I think that control does something beautiful in Standard that as long as I've been there. As somebody who hasn't played a ton of control, just mostly a few blue-white Sphinx of Revelation style decks at GPs. I think that it does something great for the format, and that we do miss it. I think that there are people fighting the good fight like Shaheen Sarani, and then there are people like Adrian Sullivan who have given up, and if people like Adrian Sullivan are giving up, I think that's a problem, and I think that it's something that can be addressed, and I hope that it's just because of the mana that this happened, because being able to play anything you want in a 4-color format is just going to be a problem for so many different styles of decks that want to play this control game. So, yeah, that's like a rant, I guess. But yeah, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out Oasis Games at oasisgamescc.com. Actually, they don't sponsor this. Maybe don't check them out. I don't know. They're pretty great. You can check them out anyway. But check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/ccmtg. Thank you, everybody, for watching this week. If you have any comments about why you think control is good, or if you have a great control deck, post it in the comments. Let us know. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. and watch some of the testing videos between me and Matt, or listen to the podcast. You can find it here on YouTube. And yeah, go crush whatever event you're going to next, and we'll see you guys all next week. Bye.